Thank you very much also to the National Endowment for Democracy and especially to Diego Abente to sponsor this talk about the Uruguayan elections. I'm going to give you a few the results, the main results of the last election in the two rounds. But first of all, I would like to stress that the Uruguayan democracy has been, well, I would say, well known and as a party democracy, and this is, I would say, the oldest party democracy in Latin America and one of the few party democracies in the world for a long time until the, let's say, the Second World War. So that's one important point to keep in mind when we look at the Uruguayan history, the Uruguayan politics, and to this election in particular, if you will. The second point to stress is that this party democracy has been also a pluralist democracy. Pluralist democracy with some features of consocial democracy, which has been built up by the two traditional parties, the Colorado Party and the Partido Nacional, well, let's say since the end of the 19th century. And, well, this last feature has been, I wouldn't say lost, but perhaps erased a little since 1990. Let's say that the entrance in the political arena of the third party, this Frente Amplio, well, resulted in a sort of changes in the different party relationships, and especially in this sort of pluralist and consocial arrangements, which have been one of the very important Uruguayan features during the history. So, one of the questions of these this new elections puts on the table is if perhaps we are going to get back to at least one of the features, one of the ingredientes, one of the ingredients. Yeah, no, well, always. It's hard. I'm sorry. Of these consocial democracy, which was a very famous word in Uruguay, coparticipación. So let me show you the results. We had two rounds, October and November. And what was the mystery, Nikki? Yeah. There. And the second turn, the presidential election in November, the Mujica, the Frente Amplio candidate, got 52%, 52.4%. And the contender candidate from the Partido Nacional got 43%, 43.5%. And the first round in October, which are it's concurrent parliamentary and presidential elections, the Frente Amplio obtained the absolute majority in the two chambers with almost 48% of valid votes. There is a prize for the winner, so especially in the chamber. So you get a couple of deputies more than you really earn in the polls. And well, these are the general results, which show that in the first round, 48% for the Frente Amplio, 29% for the Partido Nacional, who went down from the former election, and 17% to the Partido Colorado, which went up from the last elections, and 2.5 for the Partido Independiente. There is another very small left group which didn't had. There is in the second round. It's quite an important. You perhaps for you in the United States this is ridiculous, but for us, 4 points of blank and annulated or
annulled
spot votes. It's quite a percentage, and this could be considered as a. I'll come back to this on this point. So the first question is about what kind of government we can have in the second Frente Amplio, second left government. So if we compare to the first Frente Amplio government, this first Frente Amplio government under Vázquez presidency was one of the social democratic governments in Latin America, together with the Brazil government under Lula, and Chile under Ricardo Lagos and Michelle Bachelet. These are, we can define social democratic governments as main features as governments formed by institutional left. That means institutional left parties of a sort of socialist lineage and with links to the labor unions, which are fully integrated to, and this is very important, to plural and competitive party systems. And that makes a big difference with other left experiences in Latin America nowadays. I mean, left governments with parties, left governments without parties. That makes the difference. And that's one main feature of the. I would say that perhaps Uruguay is the leading case in social democratic experiences in Latin America. The second important feature is that it was a majority government with 52% of the chamber of the House, and also the third one that we had during this government a very strong presidential leadership, because the president was the leader of the party, and a leadership built up, let's say, along many years and with a strong support inside the party. What about the second government? So first, we can say that the social democratic experience is very likely to continue, although, of course, with different emphasis and some political variations. But it will continue in a more competitive political scenario. And for the first point, that we could perhaps have some doubts about this idea of social democratic continuity because of the persona of Mujica. Mujica has a very particular persona and or built up a very particular persona, perhaps. And he has a curious language, rather rough, I would say, and rather frank. And he never uses suit or a tie. He's always dressed. He came from the first time to the House when he was elected in, I don't remember, in 1990s or 94, in a scooter and with a cask. And so he worked up this sort of features. And of course, there are some points in the political discourse and the lineages. He is, as Cindy stressed, he was one of the members of the Tupamaro movement, and he not only this, which at the beginning were against the idea of the Frente Amplio or of building a left party to compete in elections, and they were poor sort of focus group. Focus, not in sort of research, but in sort of build a revolutionary focus. So, also some anti-establishment stances, and some to be at the left of the president, at the left or to the left of the Minister of Economy, who was finally his contender in the primary elections, and also some friends in the neighborhood, like the Kirchners or perhaps the Bolivarian sympathies of these candidates. Many of these things which were stressed during the primary election to win. And then, but I think the party system and the strength of the party, of the Frente Amplio as a party itself, it's a sort of well, I won't say insurance, but it's quite accept very difficulty sort of turns to radical left or to populist leaning. So I think it's what we have seen afterwards during the first round and especially during the second round was a different Mujica, not only because he hired the best marketing expert in the country, who is really a very, very good expert in marketing, but also because he was moderated by the party, but the Frente Amplio itself, and of course he even bought a suit to visit Lula. So.
To visit Lula.
To visit Lula, yeah.
Who had bought a suit the day before.
Yeah,
Right.
and he borrowed a Lula tie.
Wow.
And that's one point we can discuss about this, but this is quite clear point. I would say that it's more or less the same kind of government, the same line with different emphasis. The second point, it is a more competitive political scenario, and this is, it disappeared first. So, the Frente Amplio made an excellent election. It remains as the biggest party in the in Uruguay, which could be compared with the Partido Colorado in the 50s, around the 50% of the votes. Mujica got more votes for the presidency than Vasquez got in 2004, 2 points more. But in the first round, the Frente Amplio obtained 2.5 points less than in the former election 2004. We can say that regarding this first round, which is the election that established the parliament seats, the Uruguayan electorate is roughly divided into two similar blocks, around 48% each one, 48.5% for the opposition, 48% for the Frente Amplio. So the Frente Amplio has a rather comfortable but less loose parliament majority than in this period to the present period. In the House of Representatives, it has the 50% instead of 52. In the Senate, it has 17 instead of 18. So there's the numbers, the figures.
You should go back to that for a second.
Yes, of course. We have a very. I'm coming back with the different weights of the different groups. So in a moment, but I can. So you have for the Frente Amplio in the Senate 16 senators plus the vice president, so it means 17. Partido Nacional 9 and Partido Colorado 5. In the House, they have 50 deputies, 30 for the Partido Nacional, and 17. It's more or less exactly the result. This shows that the Uruguayan electoral rules are sort of pure representative because it shows exactly the results of the first round. So, can I continue with this? So, the other point is that Mujica is a very strong popular leader. He is also a very strong party leader. His group is the biggest group in the Frente Amplio. The MPP and allies share much more than the 50% of the Frente Amplio seats in the House, and it is the first time in the life of the Frente Amplio that the same sector keeps the majority from one election to the next. This was not the case for other majorities in each election. That's a part of the history, but we have the second part of the history. Mujica is not the sole chief of the sole leader of the Frente Amplio. He has to test his presidential leadership, competing with Astori and competing with Tabaré Vázquez. Astori, who was the former Minister of Economy during this first government, and was the contender of Mujica during the primaries, has been presented as a sort of, well, some people say it's a sort of co-government. I think this is quite exaggerated, but it's meant to share the government and to have influence on political decisions, mainly on economic decisions, and on certain strategic nominations. But there is a third man, who is Tabaré Vázquez, who is going home with a very high popularity, around 70%, more than perhaps any other future ex-president in the new democratic period, and he will probably play a very important role as party leader and as a possible candidate for the next elections. We don't know, but and he's a specialist in letting know that we wouldn't know, but this shadow will be there for I think the whole period. Perhaps not at the beginning, but very quickly. And so we have perhaps a powerful actor, off-stage actor, competing with Mujica, but also competing with Astori, because Astori has been his dauphin, we say? Preferred candidate successor?
His
Protégé. Protégé.
protege
Yeah,
is better.
we don't say Delphine, so...
No,
Oh, that's it.
not in English.
Not in English. Not in English, I'm sorry. So, but Astori and Vasquez have been contenders many years inside the Frente Amplio, and it's not so easy that Tabaré Vasquez, if he wants to be again a candidate for the next elections, leave the place to Astori. And Tabaré Vasquez is probably stronger than Astori in political strength as a political leader inside the Frente Amplio. So inside the House, the Mujica sector and its partners have a clear majority. I'll show it. And in the Senate, we have a more balanced picture. I don't know if we have these. It's not very clear, but Mujica can count on 27 or 29, let's say almost 30 deputies out of 50 in the chamber, in the House. Astori has, let's say, 10. The socialists have 9, and they will be perhaps sort of in the middle of the two big sectors. And there is also a couple of groups, small groups, which could be sort of moving to one side or to the other, depending on the political issue and bargaining. Is it more or less clear that we have a very clear majority for the president, the president's group? In the Senate, it's not so clear, but the Mujica group has 6 senators. The Communist Party, it's in Spanish, I'm sorry, but it's clear. It has 1 senator. A former compañero de armas, which
Comrade in arms.
yeah, comrade in arms, and perhaps sort of father of Mujica in many senses. It's they form a group as an escission of the Tupamaros group, and they have one senator. The Astori group has 5. The socialists have 2, and the another small group has 1. So, in the government formation, we will have probably a very hard internal negotiation. But the first question is if there will be a sort of a coalition party with coalition government with the other parties. I think this is rather. I would say that's very impossible, and the possible cabinet shares more or less the picture of the Senate. 5 for the President group, 1 for the Huidobro group, 1 for Communist, 4 for Story, 2 for Socialist, and 1 for the Vertiente Artiguista. This is just, this has to be arranged probably in this month. There will be a second circle of bargaining about the government agencies. You know that Uruguay has the privilege to be at the 18th place in the LoRa index of privatization, 18th on 18 countries in Latin America. So it has the last privatization, the lowest privatization index. And so we have quite a lot of government agencies, entes autónomos and services. And then there are, of course, some very strategic agencies, the central bank, the national bank, and several public enterprises and several social services. So the negotiation for the councils, members of the councils of these public enterprises would be quite hard also inside the Frente Amplio. But then comes another very important point, and it's the what I was talking about this, the coparticipación, which means that opposition parties, members of the opposition parties, occupy or are entitled as members of the government agency councils, which are collective plural councils, as minority members, still being in the opposition. You don't have to be members of the government. You don't have to be a part of the coalition to be inside this group. This was the Uruguayan tradition until 1990s, even one government after the dictatorship, during the first Sanguinetti government. So there is a possibility, and it has been announced as such, that after almost 20 years, for the first time, the opposition come back to the opposition parties come back to the agencies. Of course, this is a problem of number of members and which party and which party sector, and this is something that has to do with a new picture in the party system. That means that for the first Frente Amplio government, the main partner or interlocutor was the Partido Nacional. But now we have the Partido Colorado who came back to scene, and then there are important possibilities to have bargaining regarding these agencies, and to have the opposition inside these agencies, which means first that they have real possibilities to be inside the let's say the cuisines of the many of the very important centers of public policy decision making, and also it has a very good effect in the political atmosphere, in the general political system. So this is one point. The other point is it has been many speculation about these, the possibility of have political programmatic agreements between the new government or the elected government and the opposition parties, and even to have working groups on strategic public policy, and especially to some strategic reforms. The four subjects proposed by the government, and it's education, environment, public safety, first of all, energy, education, and environment. There is perhaps possibility for other subjects, other groups, state reforms, and other public policies. This is something that comes from Chile. You know very well that especially Bachelet has worked with these commissions for the very, very, very hot problems as educations. For instance, when the streets of Santiago were burning with the education problems, she organized this. They're mainly sort of in Chile. They are mainly sort of commissions formed by technicians, experts, and not for politicians. But this is not the Uruguayan tradition, and perhaps we can find in some subjects experts, but the politicians have the last word. And I personally think, we can perhaps discuss this afterwards, that these groups could be perhaps organized, integrated by all the parties, but the real bargaining and the real process will be inside the parliament, which is rather proper and fair way of government. So, last point. Well, I don't have the last point here, but I will tell you. There is another problem in Uruguayan in the recent years. As the rules, the constitutional rule to name the electoral court and the account court, Tribunal de Cuentas,
Controller.
yeah, the national controller, and other very important control boards. It's that we need 2/3, 2/3. So it's something that it cannot be done by one party. This is organized like this since the 20s in the 19th century, and it has been done like this for many years until I think the last time we have this nomination was 95, and the electoral court and this account GAO, it's has been with the same members during this time, even with the government has changed, and even with the members, the opposition parties have changed a lot. And this is a very hard problem, and it has not been a real problem because the court, the electoral court, has been working very well, and also the accounting GAO, but it's still sort of asignatura pendiente for the governments, and this will be probably, very probably, a very good point of bargaining, and the government has this time an advantage. He has the national party, but it has the Colorado party with a good 17% to negotiate with. So I would say this as the main points we can perhaps discuss. I have some points about the change in balance inside the National Party and some other points. But this is all for the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jorge. And now we're going to have Arturo Portekansky, our discussant, to comment. I will skip the presentation. You all know him. He's a professor of international economic policy at American University and a distinguished economist in residence at the School of International Service. Arturo?
Thank you very much. Good morning. Pleasure to see so much interest in Uruguay. I thought it all went to Honduras or some other place.
That's next Tuesday.
That's Tuesday's program. But anyway, sorry to have arrived a little bit late. Thank you to Diego and to Cynthia for hosting this event and for inviting me. And as you know, I'm an economist, not a political scientist, and one thing we do and we practice, besides trying to find the perennial free lunch, is we know what our comparative advantage and disadvantage is. So I'm going to stick to my own knitting and talk about the economic aspects rather than the more political aspects that were covered so well by Jorge. And basically three issues. What was the economic backdrop during the election campaign? What is the economic legacy that the outgoing Vasquez administration is leaving to the incoming Mujica administration? And what are the likely priorities of and the challenges ahead in terms of economic policy and economic reform for the Mujica government? I hope that was not covered, any of that, and I figured I would address that. So first, what was the economic backdrop during the election campaign? It was a good one, and in this regard, Uruguay is not an exception to the rule, but it's part of the rule that, as you might know, the 07, early 09 international recession and credit shock and so on has not affected Latin America all that much. Certainly, recessionary forces have affected Mexico in particular. But as you go further and further away from the U.S. border, there have been no financial crises in Latin America for the first time in history. No major devaluations of currencies and debt crises and banking crises and so on. And even the recessionary impact of the collapse in world trade and investment and consumption that did take place, let's say from September of 08 until March of 09, had, in comparison with prior such adverse exogenous shocks, had a very small impact, a very limited repercussion. So that by the time the Uruguayan electorate went to the polls, unlike, let's say, if we were to have an election today here, although in case you didn't see the news, the unemployment rate came down from 10.2 to 10 as of this morning. But anyway, what was not foremost in people's minds was an economic crisis. On the contrary, the indicators for recent weeks and months as people went to the polls are that the Uruguayan economy, like the Brazilian economy and others, are on the upswing again. And even before the upswing, the situation was a good one. Let me give you some examples. During the period 2005 to 2008, rounding, GDP per capita in Uruguay went up from about $6,000 a year to $10,000 a year. So people felt, more money in their pocket. Of course, part of that was a strengthening of the currency. It wasn't all real income in pesos, but in any case, as was true in other Latin American countries, there was a period of fat cows, and people felt it. GDP growth in the 05-08 period in Uruguay averaged 7%, which even for Chile is an achievement, but for Uruguay is almost a miracle. So, 7% growth on average during the 4 years, 05-08, was very good. That meant that the unemployment rate could come down steadily. Before 05, it was around 13%, the national unemployment rate, and we don't have the underemployment and the statistical problems, of other countries where there's a lot of people in the underground economy, not as much. So unemployment used to be higher than 13%, and by the end of 08, it came down to less than 8%. And as people went to the polls, the unemployment rate, we now have the number for November, was 6.4, the lowest practically since records began. So people didn't, have to go with a fear for their jobs to the polls. The inflation rate averaged about 7.25% during the 4 years 05-08, and when people went to the polls, it was also 6 and change. 6.4 is the November number, like the unemployment number. Exports during the boom years more than doubled, from $3.5 billion a year to $7 billion a year. And then they fell for 12 consecutive months starting in October of 08. But we now have the November preliminary numbers, and it shows for the first time exports rising. So it's another example where, especially considering the very good performance in earlier years, the decline was not very severe, and already in November, say, if it's true, it's the economy stupid, in other words, people could go to the polls and focus on the candidates and so on, and do that. The exchange rate, before 05, to buy a dollar, you needed 25 pesos. The peso strengthened before the September 08 crisis to the point where you could buy a dollar with just 19 pesos. Then the currency depreciated to 24, as did the real and so many other currencies, but it's back to 20 pesos now. So again, the currency tells a story. So in sum, there was no need for a protest vote. There was no need for an anti-establishment vote. Mujica, all he had to promise was continuity. And he could benefit from a coattail effect from Tabaré Vázquez's administration. All he had to promise was not to rock the boat. So I think that's something to keep in mind. And of course, the choice of Danilo Astori as vice president and basically the head of the economic team, in case anybody needed reassurance, was duly provided. So that was the backdrop. And it's also the backdrop in other countries that are going to the polls. In general, it's nice not to be in a crisis when you have to choose who the next leader is and so on. Now, the legacy. What is the legacy? Well, the legacy is largely a good one, too, as you can see, because the economy is on the upswing. There's no need for, drastic austerity measures and going hat in hand to the IMF and, imposing all kinds of emergency measures and so on. The consensus forecasts are that in 2010, Uruguay will have growth of 4% at least. That GDP per capita will continue to increase to maybe $12,000 from $10,000, largely because of the appreciation of the peso, not because of a real thing. But anyway, people will be able to, if you see Uruguayans on vacation here, you'll know why. Inflation has started to come down, will likely be in the vicinity of 5.5% next year. Unemployment will probably stay in the six and change level, and the exchange rate will probably stay strong around 20 or 19 or something like that. So in general, the legacy is good, the momentum is good, the economy is pointed in the right direction. So that's also very important for the incoming government. However, there are some howevers. Okay. First is inflation is still too high. I mean, of course, by historical standards, to speak of inflation of 5, 6, 7% is in Latin America, you might think a luxury. But we've come a long way, baby. We now have a lot of countries that for several years have had inflation closer to 0 than to 5, never mind 50, never mind 500, never mind 5,000. So inflation in the past several years and to this day is too high. To give you an example, in the U.S. we have deflation. The last consumer price index for October had a minus sign in front of it on a year-on-year basis, minus 0.2. In Chile, since it was mentioned, the inflation rate, the latest number for October, also had a minus number, minus sign in front of it, minus 1.9. So a lot of countries are having a deflation problem, and Uruguay still has an inflation problem. In Brazil, the November preliminary November number is 3.6 year-on-year. So inflation in general is running high, and as you will see, the numbers are misleading. No, we don't cheat and lie like the Argentines do with their statistics, but there is an element of repressed inflation. There's an element of repressed inflation because, as I will mention in a minute, oil price increases were not fully passed to consumers. They were absorbed by the government. And electricity price increases were not fully passed on to consumers. So despite repressed inflation, it's not, as I say, that they fooled around with the numbers. They subsidized consumer demand. Inflation, if you take away these subsidies, would have been and would be much higher than it is. So there is an inflation problem. In fact, the central bank has consistently missed its inflation targets in recent years, although probably this year and next year they will meet it. But part of the answer is they have a very wide inflation target, which is 3 to 7%. So of course, if you if you have that kind of wide range, you have to be really wrong, which they did. They had almost 10% inflation. So, but anyway, so inflation is still too high, and I'll have some more comments about that. Secondly, in terms of the legacy, the public sector accounts, namely the government budget, has been weakened in recent years. Of course, during the fat cow years, revenues grew a lot, but spending also grew a lot. So Uruguay did not, unlike some other countries, set aside funds, rainy day funds or something like that. Basically, spending went up with revenues. And now revenues, of course, they have not collapsed, but the growth rate of revenues has diminished, and for a while there they were flagging and so on. So, for instance, the fiscal accounts were in balance in 2007, and then it was in deficit of 1.5 percentage points of GDP in 2008, and the estimate for this year is a deficit of 2.5% of GDP, mainly due to the cost of the subsidies to electricity and oil consumers. Some of that will naturally reverse as the economy strengthens, revenues comes down, and maybe some of these subsidies will be reduced. And certainly oil at 70, 80 is not at 140, so the subsidy doesn't have to be as high. But still, what to do with these subsidies is an issue. and what to do with the fiscal accounts is an issue. So there is certain repressed inflation, and there will have to be very political decisions about what to do with the pricing of oil and electricity and other things. The third, however, of the good legacy, otherwise good legacy, is the run-up in wages. Wages in the private sector and the public sector have gone up a lot in recent times. For instance, to date, in 2009, in nominal terms, wages on average have gone up 15%, and because inflation is a lot less than 15%, in real terms, real wages this year are up 8%. In a year of weakness, when wages probably should have come down in real terms and should have not gone up in nominal terms. And even in the public sector, civil servants and so on, real wages this year, real salaries are about up 6% in real terms. So there is a kind of a wage explosion that is there, and it's not the product of market forces. In Uruguay, there is a tripartite negotiation, business, unions, and the government. And you can imagine that with a Frente Amplio government, a lot of business people feel that it's 2-to-1, the negotiation. It's not really tripartite. And with Mujica coming to power, they probably will feel that it's still 2-to-1. It's an unfair negotiations. But I mean, wages, this wage increase does not reflect productivity enhancements, does not reflect how a particular business is doing, if it's making money or is not making money. It's wage decisions from above, old style, like used to be the case in some other countries, in governments in times when governments were interventionist and paternalistic. So something has to be done about wage growth by the government, because they are at the table. And also, of course, with regard to, they should set an example with regard to civil servants, because if they give big wage increases to the civil servants, there will be tremendous pressure for the private sector to also grant wage increases. And the fourth, however, of the otherwise good legacy, let me re-emphasize, is that Uruguay is still overly dependent on unpredictable, or some might say all too predictable, Argentina. The real tiger, the real stabilizing force, the real anchor in the neighborhood is Brazil. And we're not dependent enough on Brazil. We're still dependent on Argentina through linkages through trade and tourism and non-resident bank deposits and investments in agriculture and construction and real estate and so on. And as you can tell from my comments, I don't like the way things are going in Argentina, and my forecast for Argentina is not an optimistic one. So the still large dependence on Argentina, I think, is more of a problem. Of course, Uruguay has not been able to branch out beyond the Rio de la Plata all that much, and with regard to Brazil, it's becoming more and more of a blessing, but with regard to Argentina, is more and more of a curse. Now, the third and final point was what are the likely priorities and the likely challenges ahead? Well, the challenge that will not be met is, of course, you might know, Uruguay has a...
That's the challenge.
What did you say?
That's the challenge.
With the cell phones off. So no problem, no problem. So the big challenge that will not be raised, will not be met realistically is, as you might know, Uruguay has for decades now a European-style welfare state, without European levels of productivity and without European levels of tax revenues. So we're living a collective lie that we can have, you know, all the benefit schemes and everything, the free education and the free health care and the free this and the free that, an idea that we imported from Europe decades ago, but it's very difficult to pay for. So the quality, since the quality has deteriorated steadily over the decades. That's why, you know, whether it's education or public hospitals or whatever, yes, you're entitled to them, but good luck, you know, when you go there. So that's the underlying challenge. I just want to mention it and say I don't think that the dismantling of the welfare state will ever be a priority, never mind an accomplishment of the Mujica administration. But why not mention it just in passing, at least for a minute? Now, so what are realistically some of the priorities? Well, as you saw, according to Mujica himself, he wants to do something about education, improving the quality of education. He wants to do something about environmental issues. He wants to do something about public safety, which has deteriorated a lot, although deteriorated a lot by Uruguayan, not Latin American standards. You still can go on with a scooter if you want to Congress, and you'll get there. And energy, because Uruguay is very dependent on imported oil and hydroelectricity, and the imported oil sometimes can get very expensive. And the hydro dams, well, sometimes it doesn't rain. So it's a big problem. So I think Mujica is going to try to work on these things. And these are big items. They are everywhere from the United States, or probably Canada, yes, Canada, down to Chile, including Uruguay. You know, the delivery and the quality of public services like education, healthcare, you know, public safety. So those are big issues, very difficult, very complex. In the case of Uruguay also, like here, you have to deal with the unions, which are very strong and don't want to, in general, change anything. But Mujica says that actually the fact that organized labor is formally an ally of his and his party maybe can be turned into an advantage, because he can try to come up with something that maybe, you know, he can sell to them and they can support. So related to that is reform of the state. And he has met these days even with some experts from New Zealand to learn about how another little country has modernized and reformed itself. And he seems to be genuinely interested, and he has said that he has acknowledged that the state in Uruguay is too big, too slow, too overburdened, too inefficient. But he was quick to assure people that he's not talking about layoffs of civil servants, but of improving their productivity and their focus and so on and so forth. So we could see some developments there. Maybe he will be a bit more ambitious in this regard than Tabaré Vázquez was. And then there are, to conclude, some other items that even though they are not listed or mentioned by Mujica as priorities, who knows, maybe we see some progress in these areas. One is to grant autonomy to the central bank. The central bank in Uruguay is really not independent much at all. That's one of the reasons why inflation is too high, because the central bank has multiple mandates. It's the financial agent for the government. It's conflicted. Sometimes it still focuses on the exchange rate rather than on an inflation target. And I think, who knows, maybe we see a definition on this somewhat technical issue, but actually might be a way to introduce an important reform by wrapping it in technical things, and it's very important. But this is definitely an issue that I hope they address it, and who knows, they might grant the central bank greater autonomy and formalize an inflation targeting regime and make more progress on this front. Another issue that is being mentioned, and who knows, maybe we see some progress on this too, is some kind of fiscal rule Chilean or other style, to avoid what happened. Namely, next time that the fats are that cows are fat, we won't slaughter them all. Namely, some kind of fiscal rule so that next time on the upswing, if it's a steady upswing, we save some of the revenues, or we are forced to save some of the revenues for some kind of rainy day fund, as some other countries have done. So we may get a fiscal rule out of this administration. De-dollarization, there's been a trend of de-dollarization. Maybe they haven't mentioned it. Maybe this is something that could be done. And so there are some items, I say, are not publicly discussed, but who knows, maybe we get some pleasant surprises. I don't think they're that difficult politically to accomplish as reforming education and energy and so on. Those are very complicated issues.
Thank you very much, Arturo, for this very interesting comment. We are going to open now the floor for questions and answers. I would appreciate if you could identify yourself before asking the questions, and turn on the microphone, please, because we are recording the session. Yeah, I have the gentleman over there.
I'm Howard Wiarda from CSIS and the Wilson Center. Both of these were really interesting, excellent presentations, but my question is for Don Jorge. And it's two-sided. The first part is you didn't mention the possibility of extra-constitutional challenges to the new government. And either, the two explanations are possible. Either you see this as not likely, or you'd rather not talk about it, which is often the case in Chile and Uruguay. And the second side of that question is Uruguay has this very long tradition of parliamentary and semi-parliamentary and quasi-parliamentary government and even plural executives at various points. Would you see that kind of constitutional change as being resurrected at some time during this administration, or do his majorities in the Congress rule out a constitutional challenge to executive authority?
Thank you very much. We're going to take 3 questions at a time, otherwise we won't have time. Cynthia?
Excuse me, I have a question actually for both of you about the nature of the welfare state in Uruguay. I was wondering whether the Vázquez administration was successful in changing the composition of social spending from its primary focus on pensions and on older people, and shifting beneficiaries to younger sectors of the population, particularly children and women. And then also for Jorge, I was wondering whether the existence of these commissions within the Congress and within the government agencies, why is it that is a mechanism for participation and consensus and not stalemate, as we see in our own legislature in this country?
Thank you. And we're going to take one more question here. Yes, the gentleman over there, then you.
Thank you. Norman Bailey, Institute of World Politics. 2 excellent presentations, but I want to ask a question to Mr. Lanzaro on a subject which he did not devote much time to, which is Uruguayan foreign policy in the Mujica administration. As we know, Tabaré Vázquez had excellent relations with the United States during his administration. It's rather likely that the relations of the Mujica government with the United States will be less friendly. Mujica said on several occasions that his role model is Lula. Lula has certainly been very moderate in domestic policy. He has not been moderate in foreign policy. His friendship with Chavez, the role of Brazil in the Honduran crisis, his invitation and embrace of Ahmadinejad, and so on and so forth, are hardly what one would call moderate policies in foreign policy area. Do you see Mujica following Lula both in terms of moderation internally but also radicalism externally, or not?
Okay, now we're going to ask Jorge first and then Arturo later to answer the three questions.
Well, thank you very much for the questions. About extra constitutional challenges, I don't think that we do have any challenges in that. I think that since the democratic transitions, let's say after the first democratic government, militaries have been at home, and we have been winning civil rule on militaries. This has been very important during the last Jorge Valle administration, with a special commission to deal with the human rights, and this has been also very important during the Vasquez administration. We have in jail the Bordaberry, who was the last president elected and who was at the head of the coup d'etat in '73. We have also in jail the last president during the dictatorship, who was a very important general, Alvarez, and there have been very quite a lot of trials and judgments too, and this happens, and other things about human rights. This happens without any noise in los cuarteles, in
Barracks.
the barracks. Oh, some noise, but not too much. And there is a very important thing in this. The party systems recovered centrality. As that's the big rule. Finally, outsiders don't challenge the system if the system is strong. So that's one of the if it was the regarding the other question, constitutional change, I don't think this is in the agenda. The change to parliamentary regime or semi-parliamentary regime or semi-presidential regimes, this is nothing. This is not in the agenda. What we do have is a sort of very curious presidential government during the Vasquez administration and perhaps during Mujica administration. It's a sort of a cabinet government in presidential regimes, which is a sort of contraintuitive image. So this is because the Frente Amplio structure. It's a coalition party, so it's not a coalition, but it has the lineage and the composition of a coalition. Regarding the welfare state, I think I don't have the figures now, but I think the Vasquez administration had two very important innovations in social policy. One was the money transfers to poor people, which has been organized in almost any country in Latin America, but was hardly beginning in Uruguay. This was an important policy, and this policy was mainly addressed to children and women householders or alone women chief or householders. And this is, I think this is quite an important change. And this change, and this is also important, has been done not in a sort of, I would say it's sort of to mark the contrast, not in sort of a Caracas mood, but in sort of a very institutional organization. These are services organized through the Bank of Social Services, and the people get the money in the bank, not get the money through clientelistic networks. So this is also important. What about the commissions? The commissions, I think the commissions play a role of, let's say, of organizing the stage and the entrance of the government. The Mujica speech, the day of the year, was a very good speech in terms of opening and with bridges to the opposition, recognizing the importance of other parties, and of course recognizing the importance of the internal. And the commissions sometimes are just a way of bearing problems, but also a way of talking and having a sort of complement of the parliamentary bargaining, which is, I think, the real bargaining in our case. Perhaps not in the Chilean case, because they have a very different decision-making process. They have a decision-making process mainly with an important share of technocratic stuff, and we don't. Sometimes, if I have seen in the papers the distance between the very important economic experts of the Partido Nacional, brilliant economist fellows, who are very close to the Frente Amplio partners, and this is true. But the parties are in the middle, so it's not a question of an agreement of experts. Well, I didn't talk about foreign relations because I don't know anything about it, but but I would say that.
Go ahead anyway.
Yeah, well, as I did for other subjects. No, I think first of all, there is a big problem that we don't have a very good Minister of Foreign Affairs. We don't have a house built up, an institutional research, as they do in Mexico, or of course Itamaraty, and even, well, in Chile now. And even in Argentina since Guido di Tella, they have improved the machine, and this is something that it's one of the state reforms which are not so difficult, but are quite possible. We shall see. I think Mujica will be quite pragmatic as he is for any other subject. Perhaps he will. The accent will be on Brazil and Mercosur, perhaps, and perhaps the speech will be there. Perhaps they can have more easy relations with Argentina, perhaps, but I wouldn't say he will be. Against or the states, or if he has very pragmatic orientation also to the states, he will probably follow Lula in UNASUR and other subjects which are already quite strong, but the politics, the orientation towards the states will be probably quite pragmatic. And this is an important question because the Minister of Foreign Affairs will be one of the strong, hard negotiations in the next days.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, about the Argentinian conflict, we are waiting the judgment from The Hague, and it probably will come in March or April, just when the government comes to office. So
good or for bad.
And I think he's going to wait before any movement regarding Argentina.
And just very quickly, yes, as was mentioned, Uruguay, like all other countries, has been trying to target its spending more on the poor and has done so. The problem is that spending on the poor in Uruguay and in many other countries was an additional spending item during the time when revenues were rising. Namely, there was no offset to cut spending. So this is a bit of a problem, and that's also, you know, yeah. So the idea is to reorient the spending within a certain budget constraint, not to add on. And so now, if revenues are a little leaner going forward, that's why the issue of, for instance, civil servant wages across the board and so on becomes important, because there may not be enough money to cover everything if revenues don't grow. And with regard to the presence of representatives of opposition on the board of directors of state-owned companies, I see it as very important because well, if you're not going to have privatization and you're going to have all these state entities, you might as well have a little transparency, and and the way to get a little transparency is to have some people from other parties on the board. Otherwise, you know, it all happens in the kitchen when nobody's watching. So I think it's very important to have it, and it's an element of a little control, a little auditing, a little transparency.
Okay, we're going to two more brief questions, and then we close because, yes, sir.
Hugh Schwartz.
Microphone, and if you could identify yourself.
Okay, Hugh Schwartz, formerly with the University of the Republic in Uruguay. My question really is to Arturo. You didn't mention the legacy of the past has disappeared, of tremendous emigration of university graduates and other skilled workers from Uruguay. Has this changed in the last couple of years? What are the perspectives here? And the brief question to Jorge. Mujica has been rumored to be rather ill in the past. Is this likely to be a problem for the future?
Thank you. And yeah, the gentleman over there.
Hi, Peter Meyer with the Congressional Research Service. This is for Jorge. What do you see as the future for the Blancos and the Colorados in terms of leadership and ideology, and the relationship between the two as well? As they seem to be pulling from the same group of voters, and they also, at least the Blancos, saw quite a setback in this election.
Thank you. I will ask Arturo to begin now with the questions, with the answers, and then Jorge to finish.
I honestly have not looked at whatever data there is on the emigration issue, whether it has abated a bit in recent years or not. I would imagine that because these last few years have been years of high growth, reduced unemployment, more opportunities, modernization, and so on, probably it was less of a problem than in the previous years when there was just stagnation, crisis, and so on. You know, the times when I left, where really it was clear that if you were the least bit ambitious, you had to leave. But I think so. I think the problem is not as serious now as that's my impression. But honestly, I don't have the numbers.
Well, I don't have the numbers. I think the trends are more or less the same. Perhaps we have less people going out in a couple of years during the 07 or 08 perhaps, but it's not so clear. The figures are always very, very impressive, and this also touches the academic capital. It's a very tragic problem because the Uruguay has made an effort since the transition, as you may know, to build up a sort of program of development of basic research in hard sciences. The chief of these, the chairman of this program, said the other day that many of the doctors, the PhD people from that program are going abroad because the salaries are incredible, uncomparable. Yeah, this is always a problem. Now we have another research system, a new research system, general for all sciences, even the non-hard sciences, and even the non-sciences as political science, and
Come on.
yeah, and but still we have to prove that this is going to keep the people at the university. It's not so clear. And coming to the Partido Nacional, I would say one thing. It's probably there is a very clear result from the election. I don't have the point here, but Lacalle didn't keep the votes that the opposition parties had got in the first round. I don't have the numbers, but he lost about 4 points, and these points are perhaps Colorado voters or even Blanco voters who either went to the Blanca vote or even to Mujica. So the resistance to Lacalle was stronger than we could imagine, and that's one point and this is probably something that is going to be a problem and a discussion in the Partido Nacional in the following days. But at the same time, we didn't see the other leader in the Partido Nacional, who was more to the center left, to the center, winning political strength. On the contrary, he lost political strength. He lost, I think, 15 deputies. The other sect, La Rañaga. So that's one point. On the Colorado Party, we have a very important issue. That is that the Colorado Party grew from 9-10% to 17%, and this is, and I think in part due to the this new leadership of Bordaberry, and also the resistance to Lacalle in the first round, and but there is a question mark about this because, as you may know, leaderships are not built up in 2 or 3 or 4 years. They have to pass 3 elections. I mean, 10 or 15 years. So it is important to have these. Perhaps we will have turnaround leadership in leaderships in all three parties, because Lacalle is probably quite in problems and trouble at home, and probably Baje, Sanguinetti, the leaders of the transition, or since the transitions, are all also in going down in the Partido Colorado, and there is a question mark about the Frente Amplio. You know that in Uruguay, people of 40 years old are wondering what they are going to do when they grown up. But you may also know that Tabaré Vázquez has almost 70 years. Astori almost 70 years, the same age, 69, I think both. And Mujica 74. So the oldest president, yeah. And by the way, he for the moment he looks like doing well with health. I don't know what will happen, but some people pray in one sense, and some people pray in another sense.
Well, thank you very much to you all for coming, and thank you for this wonderful presentation, Jorge and Arturo, and have a good day.